The moment the monitor went silent, I knew someone outside this house had just made a decision they didn't understand. The last steady beep flattened into a thin, lifeless tone that seemed to stretch across the room like a wire pulled too tight. And for a split second, I just stood there, hands still on the edge of the hospital-grade bed, feeling the air change as if the oxygen itself had thinned out. The backup battery indicator blinked red. 017, 016, and the soft hum that had filled this room for weeks. The quiet mechanical breathing that meant everything was still under control faded into nothing, leaving behind a silence so sharp it almost rang in my ears. The smell hit me next, faint but unmistakable. That warm plastic and ozone scent you only get when systems shut down wrong. Not gradually, not safely, but all at once, like someone had flipped a breaker without caring what was on the other side. I turned toward the window and saw it immediately, the streetlights still on, the houses across the road glowing like nothing had changed. Except mine. Mine was dark, completely cut off, like a target. My jaw tightened as the seconds ticked down on that screen, each one louder than the last. And then I heard it, the crunch of heels on gravel outside, slow, deliberate, confident. The front door wasn't locked. I'd stopped bothering weeks ago with the constant nurse visits and equipment deliveries, and it opened without hesitation, letting in a slice of bright afternoon light that cut across the dim hallway and stopped right at my feet. She stepped in like she owned the place, clipboard tucked under one arm, perfectly pressed blouse, that same controlled smile I'd seen at every HOA meeting, the kind that never reached her eyes. Linda Carver didn't look at the equipment first, didn't look at the patient, didn't even look at me. She looked straight at the breaker panel mounted near the wall, as if admiring her own work. "You were warned about unauthorized power modifications," she said, her voice smooth and even, like we were discussing lawn maintenance instead of the fact that my entire system had just gone offline. I could feel the tension building in my chest. Not panic. Not yet. Something colder, something more focused, as the countdown hit single digits and the room seemed to shrink around that blinking red light. Outside, somewhere down the street, a car door slammed, distant, irrelevant, while inside everything that mattered was narrowing to that machine, that number, that silence. I took a slow breath, tasting that metallic edge in the air, and finally looked at her, really looked, at the confidence in her posture, the certainty that she was in control, that this was just another rule enforced, another violation corrected. She had no idea what she'd just touched, no idea what system she had cut into, no idea that the quiet house she was standing in wasn't running on neighborhood power anymore. Not really. And as the timer dropped closer to 0, I reached for my phone with a steadiness that surprised even me, because this wasn't the moment to argue, and it definitely wasn't the moment to explain. It was the moment to let the right system answer for me. I did not run toward the machine, and I did not raise my voice because panic wastes seconds, and seconds were the only thing I did not have. So I stepped past Linda without asking permission and crouched beside the backup unit, my fingers already tracing the cables I had installed myself weeks ago, thick insulated lines running clean into the transfer switch, every connection labeled in my handwriting, every safeguard built to handle storms, outages, and failures that came from nature, not from someone with a clipboard deciding to play power authority. The red digits dropped to 0, and the screen dimmed for half a breath before the internal failsafe kicked in, a weak auxiliary cycle that bought me a little time. Not much, just enough to keep everything stable if I moved fast, and did not make a single mistake. Behind me I could hear her heels shift on the hardwood floor, that small impatient tap that said she was waiting for compliance, waiting for me to argue or beg or admit fault. But I gave her nothing, not even a glance, because I knew something she did not, something buried behind the drywall and inside that metal panel she had been so proud to shut off. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up my hands in the dim room, and for a moment I watched my own reflection in the glass, steady eyes, no hesitation, just calculation. Then I opened a contact that did not have a name, just a number I had memorized long before this house ever needed it. Linda finally spoke again, a little sharper now, like she was losing control of the script she had written in her head, telling me that the violation had been documented, that further resistance would result in legal escalation, that the association had full authority to enforce compliance across all residential utilities, and I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was so completely wrong. My thumb hovered for a second over the call button as the faint hum from the backup system struggled to hold. The air in the room feeling heavier with every passing second, and then I pressed it. The line rang once, not twice, just once, before a calm voice answered on the other end. No introduction, no questions, just presence. I did not explain the situation because I did not need to. I only said exactly what the protocol required, clear and steady, activate. Emergency support for protected medical grid. And for the first time since the power went out, something shifted, not in the room, not yet, but in the situation itself, like a switch had been flipped somewhere far beyond this street. Linda let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh, the kind people use when they think they are still in control, when they believe whatever you just did will not matter. And she adjusted her grip on that clipboard as if it were a badge, as if it still meant anything at all. While I stayed exactly where I was, one hand resting on the equipment, feeling the faint vibration of a system that was never meant to stand alone for long, and I waited, because I knew what came next would not be quiet, and it would not be something she could write a violation notice for. The first thing I heard was not inside the house, but outside, low at first, a distant diesel rumble that did not belong to this quiet suburban street where the loudest sound was usually a lawn mower on a Saturday morning, and it grew fast, rolling closer like a storm that had a schedule and a destination, and I felt it through the floor before I even saw it. A steady vibration climbing up through the soles of my boots into my chest. Linda heard it too because her head tilted slightly toward the door, that confident posture cracking just enough to show curiosity, then irritation, like something unexpected had entered her carefully controlled environment. The backup system behind me gave a strained pulse, a thin mechanical whisper fighting to hold the line, and I kept my hand on the casing, feeling every fluctuation, every fraction of power being stretched to its limit while the sound outside got louder, heavier, unmistakable now. Tires rolled over asphalt with purpose, not slowing, not hesitating, followed by the sharp hiss of air brakes releasing right in front of my house. And then another, and another, like a convoy stacking up where no convoy should be. Linda took a step toward the doorway, her heels clicking faster now, not in control anymore, but trying to catch up to whatever was unfolding. And when she pulled the door open, the light flooded in again, brighter this time, reflecting off something large and white and official parked along the curb. I stood up slowly and turned just enough to see past her shoulder, enough to catch the bold lettering across the side of the first truck, the kind of lettering you do not question because it does not belong to neighborhoods or committees. It belongs to systems that operate above them. The engine idled with a deep, steady growl, and thick power cables were already being unloaded, heavy black lines coiled like they had done this 1,000 times before, because they had. Voices moved with precision outside, calm, direct, no wasted motion. And then came the flicker, a sharp pulse through the house as the temporary grid connection synced. Not a full restoration yet, just a handshake between systems. But it was enough to make the equipment behind me respond with a stronger, cleaner hum. Linda did not say anything at first, and that was new, because she always had something to say, always a rule, always a line from a document. But now she just stood there in the doorway, clipboard lowered slightly, watching as people she did not recognize stepped onto the property like they had every right to be there. One of them glanced up, eyes scanning the house, the panel, the connections, and then nodded to someone behind him, a small motion that carried more authority than anything Linda had said all day. I could feel the shift complete as the system locked in, the hum stabilizing into that familiar, steady rhythm that meant everything was back under control, not because of luck, not because of her permission, but because the right network had taken over. I walked past her then, not rushing, not stopping, just moving toward the door, and for the first time since she stepped into my house, she moved out of the way without saying a word. The air outside felt different the moment I stepped onto the porch, thicker, charged, like the entire street had been pulled into something far bigger than a neighborhood dispute, and the line of trucks confirmed it. 3 of them parked nose to tail along the curb, white paint clean and unmarked by anything local, engines idling with that deep, controlled vibration that spoke of capacity, not convenience. Thick cables ran from the open panels on their sides, stretched across the pavement in deliberate paths, guided by people who moved like they had done this under pressure 100 times before, each step measured, each connection exact. One of them looked up as I approached, his eyes flicking from me to the house and back again, not questioning, just verifying. And when I gave a small nod, he returned it without hesitation, like that was all the confirmation he needed. Behind me, I could feel Linda at the doorway, not following, just watching, her presence suddenly uncertain, like she had stepped into a situation that no longer recognized her authority. A second vehicle rolled in at the end of the street, darker, quieter, and it did not carry equipment. It carried people in pressed uniforms and calm expressions, the kind that do not rush because they do not need to. The neighbors had started to notice by then, curtains shifting, front doors opening just a few inches, faces appearing in that cautious way people observe something they do not understand but know is important. The hum of the system strengthened again as another cable locked into place, the sound settling into a stable rhythm that matched the machines inside. And for the first time since the power had been cut, the house felt grounded again, not isolated, not vulnerable, but connected to something that did not flicker when a switch was thrown. One of the officials stepped forward, tablet in hand, eyes scanning the setup with quiet efficiency before turning toward the front of the house, his gaze landing directly on Linda, who still held that clipboard but now gripped it tighter, like it was the last piece of control she had left. He did not raise his voice, and he did not introduce himself. He simply spoke with a tone that carried weight because it did not need to prove anything, asking her to confirm the action that had been taken on this property, the unauthorized interruption of a power supply. And for a moment she hesitated, just a fraction, before falling back on the same measured tone she always used, explaining compliance, regulations, community authority, all the words that had worked for her before. But out here, in front of those trucks and those cables and those people, the words sounded smaller, thinner, like they belonged to a different system entirely. I stayed where I was, just off the steps, watching the exchange without stepping in, because this was not my part anymore. This was the system answering for itself. And as the official listened, nodding once, tapping something into his tablet, the quiet order of the scene became unmistakable, not chaotic, not dramatic, just precise, like a process that had already determined its outcome. Behind us, the house continued to hum steadily, a constant reminder that whatever had been shut down minutes ago was now fully restored, not by permission, not by negotiation, but by something that operated on a level Linda had never considered. And as the street filled with that low diesel rhythm and the soft glow of restored power behind my windows, I could see it in her posture, the realization settling in slowly, heavily, that the authority she thought she held had just been overwritten in front of everyone. The official did not argue with her, and he did not correct her. He just let her finish, the way someone lets a story play out when they already know how it ends. And when she stopped, still holding on to that steady, practiced tone, he turned the tablet slightly, so the screen faced her, not aggressively, not dramatically, just enough for her to see what he was looking at. I watched her eyes track across the display, the confidence in her expression holding for a second, then shifting, tightening, like something on that screen did not match the version of reality she had been operating under. The diesel engines behind us kept running, a constant low rhythm that filled the gaps between words, and the cables on the ground lay thick and undeniable. Physical proof that whatever system was now in control did not require her approval. He spoke again, calm and precise, referencing the classification of the system installed in my home, the registration tied to it, the designation that placed it under protected medical infrastructure. And I could see the moment it landed, not all at once, but in pieces, like a puzzle she had not known she was solving. She tried to respond, to pivot back to the language she understood, mentioning bylaws, community authority, enforcement rights, but the words came out slower now, less certain, as if each one had to push through something heavier than before. He nodded once more, not dismissive, just final, and entered another note into the tablet, his finger moving with quiet efficiency while another member of the team stepped closer to the mainline connection at the curb, checking readings, confirming load stability, everything done in a rhythm that did not pause for debate. I leaned lightly against the porch railing, feeling the vibration of the restored power through the structure of the house, steady and grounded. The same system I had helped install now running exactly as it was designed to when something went wrong. A few more neighbors had gathered by. Then, not close enough to interfere, but close enough to see, their voices low, curious, trying to piece together what had just taken over their street, and I caught fragments of it. Words like federal, medical, emergency, none of them fitting into the usual conversations that happened out here. Linda's grip on the clipboard had changed, no longer firm and commanding, but tight in a different way, like she was holding on to something that was already slipping. And when she looked up from the tablet back to the official, there was a pause, a real pause, the kind that comes when someone realizes the rules they relied on do not apply in the space they have stepped into. The official did not raise his voice when he explained the next part. He just stated it, clear and measured, that the interruption of this specific system triggered an automatic escalation, that documentation had already been transmitted, that the authority governing it did not operate at the neighborhood level, and that any further action would be handled accordingly. The street felt quieter somehow after that, even with the engines still running, like the noise had shifted from confusion to understanding. And as I stood there watching her process it, I knew this was the moment everything changed, not with a shout or a threat, but with a simple, undeniable fact that could not be rewritten or voted on, only enforced. The official finished speaking, and for a moment no one moved. Not the crew, not the neighbors, not even Linda. And it was that stillness that made everything feel final, like the decision had already been made somewhere far above this street, and all that remained was for it to settle into place. I could hear the system inside my house now, steady and confident. The low continuous hum of regulated power flowing exactly where it needed to go. No flicker, no hesitation, just clean, controlled energy replacing the silence she had created minutes ago. One of the technicians stepped closer to the main junction box at the edge of the yard, gloved hands checking the connection points with quick, practiced motions, confirming voltage, confirming stability, every movement precise and routine, like this situation was not unusual for them, like they had responded to interruptions like this before. Linda finally shifted her weight, the clipboard lowering slightly at her side as she looked. From the tablet back to the trucks, then to the cables stretched across the pavement, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, trying to find a way back to control, trying to reframe what was happening into something she could manage, something that fit inside her rules. She started to speak again, slower this time, asking about jurisdiction, about process, about whether this response had been properly authorized, and the official listened without interruption, his expression unchanged, before answering in the same measured tone that never rose, never needed to, explaining that the authorization had been automatic the moment the interruption was detected, that the system itself triggered the response, not a request, not a complaint, but a protocol. I stepped down from the porch then, the wooden steps solid under my boots, and walked a few feet closer, not to intervene, just to be present, because this was the part where the truth became visible, not in words, but in how everything aligned around it. The second vehicle that had arrived earlier now had its rear door open, and another official stepped out holding a slim folder, not thick, not dramatic, just enough to carry what needed to be documented, and he moved with the same calm efficiency as the rest of them, approaching the first official and handing it over with a quiet exchange that did not need to be overheard. The folder was opened, a few pages reviewed, and then the first official turned back to Linda, extending the document slightly in her direction, not forcing it, just presenting it, giving her the chance to see it for herself. She hesitated again before taking a step closer, her fingers tightening around the clipboard before loosening just enough to accept what was being shown, and I watched her eyes move across the page, slower than before, more careful, as if each line carried more weight than she expected. The neighbors had gone almost completely silent now, their earlier whispers fading as the reality of the situation settled in, and the entire street seemed to hold its breath, not out of fear, but out of recognition that something official, something irreversible, was unfolding right in front of them. I stayed where I was, the hum of restored power steady behind me, the diesel engines idling in front of me, and for the first time since she walked into my house, Linda looked like Someone who understood that the system she had tried to control had just shown her exactly where its limits were, and they were nowhere near this street. She did not take the document right away, and that hesitation said more than anything she had said all afternoon. Her fingers hovering just above the edge of the folder like she was weighing whether touching it would make everything real, and when she finally did, when she finally closed that last inch of distance and gripped the paper, her posture changed in a way that was impossible to miss. The confidence that had carried her into my house had nowhere to stand anymore, and I could see it in the way her shoulders settled, not dramatically, just enough to show that something inside her had shifted. The official did not rush her. He simply stood there, hands relaxed at his sides, giving her the space to read, to process, to understand exactly what had been set in motion the moment she ordered that power cut. The diesel engines continued their steady rhythm. The cables lay firm across the asphalt, and the house behind me held its quiet, stable hum like a heartbeat that had found its pace again. I watched her eyes move across the page, slower with each line, the small movements of her lips like she was reading parts, silently to herself. And then she stopped halfway through, her gaze lifting just slightly, not toward me, not yet, but toward the trucks, toward the people, toward the reality that now surrounded her. She asked a question then, softer than before, stripped of the sharp edge it had carried earlier, something about scope, about whether this response applied only to this property or extended further. And the official answered with the same calm clarity, explaining that once a protected system was interrupted, the response extended to ensure full operational continuity, not just within the home, but across any infrastructure required to support it. I could see the meaning of that settle in, the implication stretching beyond the walls of my house and out into the street she had tried to control, and for the first time she turned toward me directly, her expression searching for something, maybe confirmation, maybe contradiction, but I gave her neither, just met her gaze with the same steady calm I had held from the beginning. Another technician called out a quiet update from near the truck. Numbers confirmed, load balanced, everything within safe parameters, and the official acknowledged it with a brief nod before returning his attention to her, reminding her that all actions taken from this point forward would be documented under federal oversight, not community guidelines. The words were not loud. They did not need to be, because the entire scene around us had already made them undeniable. The neighbors stood still at the edges of their driveways, no longer whispering, just watching, understanding now that what had unfolded here was not a dispute, not a disagreement, but a line being drawn by something far beyond the reach of any neighborhood rulebook. Linda looked back down at the document, then slowly lowered it, her grip loosening just enough for the edges to shift in her hand, and in that small movement, in that quiet release of control, the entire situation reached its turning point, not with force, not with argument, but with the simple, irreversible weight of authority she could not override. The street did not return to normal after that. It shifted into something else entirely, something structured and deliberate, like a system had laid itself over everything we thought we controlled and was now running its own process without asking permission. The second official stepped forward again, the folder now closed, and spoke quietly to the first, a brief exchange that ended with a simple nod. And then things began to move with purpose, not rushed, not chaotic, just precise. One of the trucks adjusted position slightly, tires rolling a few inches to align perfectly with the curbside access point, and another technician guided the main cable into a locked configuration, securing it with a motion that looked routine but carried finality, like a door closing that would not be reopened by anyone standing here. I watched Linda as this unfolded, her eyes tracking each movement, each connection, each quiet confirmation between people who did not need to raise their voices to be heard, and I could see the realization settling deeper, not as a shock anymore, but as a steady understanding that this was no longer her situation to manage. She tried once more, not with authority this time, but with something closer to appeal, asking about next steps, about what she should do to correct the situation, and the official answered her without hesitation, explaining that there was nothing for her to correct in this moment, that the system was already secured, that any review or consequence would come through channels she did not oversee. The words landed differently now, not as a challenge, but as a boundary, clear and immovable. Behind us, The house continued to hum with restored power, the sound steady and reassuring, and I could feel it through the soles of my boots, a constant reminder that what mattered inside was stable again. A neighbor a few houses down stepped closer to the edge of their driveway, not speaking, just watching with a kind of quiet respect, and others followed, drawn by the same sense that something important had just unfolded on this street. The official turned slightly then, addressing the crew with a few short instructions, and they responded immediately, checking readouts, confirming levels, everything done with a rhythm that left no room for doubt. Linda lowered her clipboard fully at that point, her arm relaxing at her side, and for the first time since she walked into my house, she did not look like someone holding authority. She looked like someone standing in a space where authority had already been defined without her. I stepped forward just enough to stand beside the porch steps, not closer, not confronting, just present, and I could see her glance in my direction again, that brief search for something she could still hold on to. But there was nothing there for her to take back. The official closed the distance between them by a single step and spoke one final time in that same calm, measured tone, clarifying that the interruption had been recorded, that the response had been executed, and that from this point forward, the matter would proceed under formal review, not discussion. The engines continued their low, steady idle. The cables remained locked in place, and the entire street seemed to settle into a new understanding, one where the lines of control had been redrawn in a way no vote, no notice, no clipboard could undo. The official did not say anything else after that last sentence, and he did not need to, because everything that mattered had already been set in motion, not here on the street, but somewhere far beyond it, in systems that did not pause for explanations or wait for approval from people like Linda. The crew began to shift into a different rhythm, not the urgent setup from before, but a controlled maintenance flow, checking connections, logging readings, securing equipment as if they were settling in for as long as necessary, and the steady hum of power behind me never wavered, a constant reminder that whatever had been interrupted was now fully under protection. Linda stood there a moment longer, the document still in her hand, her eyes no longer scanning it, just fixed somewhere ahead like she was trying to place herself back into a situation that had already moved past her. The clipboard hung loosely at her side now, no longer a symbol of control, just an object she had not yet put down, and when she finally looked up again, it was not at the officials or the trucks, it was at the house, at the quiet glow behind the windows, at the system she had tried to shut off and had instead triggered something much larger. One of the neighbors stepped back toward their front door, another followed, the quiet audience dissolving as the moment settled into something they would talk about later, but did not need to stay and witness any longer, because the outcome was already clear. I took a slow breath and let it out. The tension that had built earlier now, replaced by something steadier, something grounded, and I turned slightly toward the doorway, catching the faint, consistent rhythm of the equipment inside, the sound that meant everything was working exactly as it should. Behind me, I heard the official speak again, not to Linda this time, but to his team, a brief confirmation that all systems were stable and that monitoring would continue. And then the street fell into a new kind of quiet, one shaped by control rather than uncertainty. Linda shifted her weight once more, then finally lowered the document completely, her fingers releasing it just enough for the edge to dip, and without another word, without another attempt to reclaim authority, she stepped back from the porch, her heels softer against the pavement now, her movements slower, like each step carried the weight of what she had just learned. I did not follow her, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing left to say, not to her, not to anyone here. The system had already answered in the only language that mattered. I turned and walked back inside, the air cooler, calmer, the hum of the machines steady and reassuring, and as I placed my hand lightly against the side of the unit, feeling the clean, consistent vibration of restored power, I knew this had never been about arguing rules or proving a point. It had been about something much simpler, something that does not raise its voice or demand attention, something that just works, quietly and completely, until the moment someone tries to shut it down and discovers exactly who it answers to.